Hi everyone, I'm your host, Malick Mercier, and this is GBH's Why It Matters, the history series where we use the past to explain the present. Today, we're going to learn about the 1969 occupation of Alcatraz Island in California by Indigenous peoples and the historical significance of this protest that lasted 19 months. We're also going to look at how the Alcatraz takeover laid the groundwork for the next generation of Indigenous leaders to take a stand on issues that are affecting their communities, like the 2016 Standing Rock Sioux protest against the proposed Dakota Access Pipeline. To help us connect the past to the present and explain why Indigenous people regard the Alcatraz occupation as their community's equivalent moment to Dr. King declaring, "I have a dream," is Dr. Kent Blansett. Dr. Blansett, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Malick. It's great to be here.
Can you just, lay the land for us? Tell us a little bit about the occupation of Alcatraz Island in 1969, what happened, and what were people protesting?
Mostly students at San Francisco State College and students from the University of Berkeley in California wanted to stage a demonstration that would draw a lot of media attention. And the one place that would draw that immediate attention was going to be Alcatraz Island in 1969. One has to remember that this is a time period in which two policies, one being the BIA relocation policy, which was meant to remove Native peoples from reservation spaces. It was meant to kind of detribalize Indigenous peoples, strip us of our culture, strip us of our languages, strip us of our identities, our histories, strip us of our tribal identities so that we would cease to be Cherokee, Lakota, or Dene and assume a quasi kind of American Indian identity. The other policy that was coinciding with this was a policy called termination. What's happening is that Congress was legislatively eradicating its treaty responsibilities with Native nations. The right to education, the right to health care that we negotiated with for all these millions of acres of land throughout the United States is now in jeopardy. The moment of November 20th, 1969, when they took over the island with 89 students. They did it at night. They gathered in Sausalito, which was across from Alcatraz Island. They took a number of boats over. And when they set foot on the island, there was automatic buzz. There was media reporters coming in from all across the United States. And so out of this, they all of a sudden had the microphone, in which we never had a microphone before. And what the students were doing with this movement is showcasing that we have real complex issues that needed to be worked out in this country, which was the ability for tribes to make their own decisions, along with those treaty rights.
Can you tell us, you've highlighted too how much of a student movement this was. Can you just tell us what was maybe different about this protest from prior protests?
One of the key parts of the occupation stemmed from its leadership. Richard Oakes, who is Akwesasne Mohawk, which is a tribe that comes from upstate New York, and a native student by the name of Lenata Warjack, who's Shoshone Bannock from Fort Hall, Idaho. And in this one movement, in which women were also pushing for greater rights nationally, we have a Native woman who's standing alongside a Native man and putting their bodies on the line. They didn't know if they were going to be forcibly taken off by at least the Coast Guard. They didn't know if the federal marshals or FBI would take them off. They didn't know what kind of trials they would face. And both Lenata and Richard Oakes had families of their own that they would take to the island. So there was an enormous amount of risk that they took in order to be able to make a stand for greater Indigenous rights. They began to at least build a free, or what would be symbolically free, Indigenous community. This became so significant is that they themselves were able to overturn that destructive federal legislation like termination and relocation. In 1970, the Richard Nixon White House made an official statement that they were going to officially repeal the policies of termination. And they also repealed that destructive policy of relocation. We now have a government-to-government relationship with the federal government because of the actions that these students took in 1969.
Do you think that the Alcatraz occupation made way for any of the protests that we've seen recently, like the 2016 Standing Rock protest?
So the occupation would end in 1971, but Red Power doesn't end in 1969 or the 1970s. Red Power continues on. We can see this in the census Standing Rock, in which Native peoples were standing up to a pipeline that was being built on treaty lands. And this would draw over 10,000 Native peoples that would make their way there to stand up against the building of this pipeline. And so out of this, it culminated a movement, and Standing Rock is that extension of Red Power. And where Red Power matters is the unity of Indigenous peoples. Where it matters is a coming together of Native nations. So what Alcatraz represents is an extreme success that's continuing to educate a global population about Indigenous rights. And I think at that, it's one of the most successful movements in American history.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blansett, for being here and for educating all of us. And it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, Malick, for having me. And my hope is that more people will take the ferry boat and head out to Alcatraz and learn a little bit more about the Indigenous rights movement in this country.